and welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Marvelous Joe.
And I'm his twin brother, Johnny DC.
And in this episode, we will be reviewing X-Men The Last Stand,
Ew.
which is a crap movie, but we're watching it in preparation for X-Men Dark Phoenix, which comes out in a couple of weeks. So we're going to go ahead and see how this one compares to what's inevitably going to be the next shit show.
Now, I vividly remember the night we first saw this film, and you really defended it.
So I did?
Yes.
Oh,
you and your girlfriend at the time, now wife. And I'm really curious to see what you have to say about it 10 plus years later.
As bad as the movie is, it does have some good things going for it, which we'll definitely get into. But I think through hindsight, I could recognize my past self as a dumbass. And yeah, we'll talk all about where this movie went wrong later on in the show. Before that, we're going to get into the news over the past week, of which there was none. However, there was a new Swamp Thing trailer for the show that comes out on DC Universe later on this week, actually. So we're going to talk about that trailer as well as the one that came out last week that focused on Alec Holland.
Yeah, and as always, we put our segment times in our episode description. So if you want to jump around in the episode, feel free to do so.
Yep, we want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Mr. eBay 007, or maybe it's Mr. eBay 007, not sure, but he wrote us a review on iTunes and gave us our 106th rating on that platform. As you guys are well aware by now, we're trying to get to 200 ratings on Apple Podcasts and iTunes so that we can become eligible to become critics on Rotten Tomatoes and have our Marvel and DC film reviews count toward those tomato meters. So if you guys could help us out by either rating us on Apple Podcasts or iTunes if you haven't already, or at least sharing the show with someone who is able to do that, that would be greatly appreciated so we can go ahead and get past this goal. Also, a heads up to our patrons on patreon.com. At the 1st of June, we will be releasing another blooper episode for you to enjoy. Those of you who aren't our patrons, go to patreon.com/dynamicduel, where for just $2 a month, you get access to a new blooper reel that we put out every month, as well as our back catalog of mini episodes, which include our top 10 lists, our movie pitches, where we come up with plots for films like Inhumans, and Martian Manhunter and Fantastic Four. It's really fun to listen to. Go ahead and check it out, again, by visiting patreon.com/dynamicduel and signing up for just $2 a month.
Yeah, it's a really good deal, and we plan on doing more monthly content once we get more patrons.
You can also visit our Patreon profile by going to our website, dynamicduel.com, and clicking on the link that says bonus content. So check that out and help support the show. But with that all out of the way,
quick, to the No Prize! So No Prize is an award that Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version of the Dynamic Duel No Prize is a digital award that we post on social media that I personally draw for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week. Last week's question was, other than Penguin and Catwoman, who are both rumored to be in the next Batman film, what other 4 Bat villains would you like to see in the upcoming film? Because there's rumored to be 6.
Right.
Or
exactly.
up to 6, I should say. So we got a lot of answers for this, and when choosing who we would give the No Prize award winner to, I was looking for someone who gave us the names of villains who haven't been seen on screen before, because both the Penguin and Catwoman have.
Right.
So I was looking for something a little fresh. So our first honorable mention goes to Casper Henry, who gave the answer Hush, Scarecrow, Ra's al Ghul, and Clayface.
Yep, and Dustin Balcom, who henceforth I will refer to as Old Dusty Balls, gave the answer the Riddler, Hugo Strange, Mad Hatter, and Ra's al Ghul.
Iranigami gave the answer Mr. Freeze or Clayface.
And check out Iranigami on Instagram. His name is basically the word imaginary spelled backwards. Great superhero content on his profile.
Kieran Pomare gave the answer Hugo Strange, the Riddler, Clayface, and Mr. Freeze.
Kenny McNeese, old K-Mac, gave the answer Dollmaker, Bentley, Jack in the Box, Riddler, and Court of Owls.
Jonathan Hazelton gave the answer...
I call him Hazelnuts.
Oh, jeez.
He's probably heard
Did
that
you come
before.
up with nicknames for everyone?
No. I'll stop.
He gave the answer Mad Hatter, Zaz, Clayface, and Solomon Grundy.
And Colby Henches, who I think we've been mispronouncing as Henchies this entire time, but that's his nickname, Henchies. He gave the answer Clayface, Poison Ivy, and Deadshot.
Aaron Alexander Jones gave the answer Killer Croc, Deadshot, Harley Quinn, and Katana.
What is this, some kind of Suicide Squad?
I love that line in the movie. And by love, I mean hate.
Joel Seagrave gave the answer Hugo Strange and Solomon Grundy.
And Caleb Albers gave the answer Riddler, Mr. Freeze, Clayface, and Poison Ivy.
I actually liked that one a lot. But a lot of those characters, except for Clayface, have already been in a movie.
Yeah, that's probably like the most A-list list so far.
Yeah. Adam Spees gave the answer Zaz, Professor Pig, Jane Doe, and Hugo Strange.
Ken Johnson gave the answer Talon, Hush, Mad Hatter, and Poison Ivy.
And at X-Men Thoughts 1 on Twitter gave the answer Vandal Savage, Clayface, Solomon Grundy, and KG Beast.
And make sure to follow X-Men Thoughts 1 on Twitter. He's reading every single X-Men comic ever and sharing his thoughts on them. It's a pretty interesting Twitter.
That's going to take a really long time.
Yeah.
And final honorable mention goes to Mike Hoffman, who gave the answer of Clayface.
So the winner of this week's No Prize, the only person to give us 4 answers and each character has not been seen on screen before, is Jeremy Orr, who said Solomon Grundy, Mad Hatter, Man-Bat, and Clayface.
Right, and just a note, Zaz has been seen on screen before a couple of times, but he's also going to be one of the main bad guys of the Birds of Prey film coming up.
Right.
So we do count Zaz as being on screen before.
Same thing with KG Beast. He was in Batman v Superman.
Right.
And by on screen, we mean like live action film, not like cartoon or television.
Right.
Just to clarify that as well.
Yes.
So congrats once again to Jeremy Orr. You win this week's No Prize.
If you, the listener, would like to win a No Prize, go ahead and stay tuned to later on this episode when we will be asking another question of the week. And now that that's done,
on to the news. Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, the DC Universe app's Swamp Thing television series will be dropping on their platform this Friday. And in lead up to that, they've been releasing, some trailers. Last week, they released one titled Alec that kind of focused on Dr. Alec Holland, who later becomes Swamp Thing. And the second one that came out this past week was called Abby, and it focuses on Dr. Abby Arcane, his love interest. Now, we didn't talk about the Alec trailer last week because it gave more of a vibe and tone for the series than anything really substantial. The Abby one is a little bit more substantial, but I'd like to talk about both of them in terms of how much of this horror angle that they're playing up. It's really interesting. And early reviews have been coming out for this, and they're saying this is DC's best show yet, which blows my mind because Doom Patrol has been really, really good. And if people are saying that Swamp Thing is better than that, I cannot wait. This is going to be like a really long week. I could already tell. So getting into the first trailer, it starts off with the actor Andy Bean playing Alec Holland in his laboratory in the swamp. And he's just talking about how he's been there a while and he's finding things that haven't been there before, right?
Even in these small snippets, I'm really compelled by his performance. He looks vaguely familiar as an actor. What else has he been in?
Nothing that I've seen before, and I agree, he does look familiar. He was in the Divergent series, and I guess he's going to be in It Chapter 2. I guess he's going to be playing Stanley Uris, which I'm sure that scene is going to be horrifying if anyone's familiar with the It story.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's cool. I mean, despite the fact that I haven't really seen him in anything, it's good to note that he stands out as being a leading man, just from what I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe his performance here. It just seems really authentic.
It's too bad that all of the Alec Holland actors are always replaced by somebody else when it comes to the character of Swamp Thing.
Right.
So we're probably only going to really see his performance in the first episode.
I think I mentioned a few episodes ago that whoever plays Alec Holland should also play Swamp Thing. But the more I think about it, that may not necessarily be the case, because if you remember from our last episode, Swamp Thing is more of a plant creature that thinks and tries to be Alec. It is not Alec. Regardless, yeah, it is sad that we may not be seeing too much of his performance in this show. Maybe in dream sequences or something, whatever.
Yeah.
But the trailer just shows him and Abby looking into the mysteries of the swamp, and then it just gets horrific. These cadavers.
Yeah, being reanimated by plants.
By plant roots life. And just, it's gross. Really gross. It ends with this big explosion, and Abby's looking around for Alec, and then she sees Swamp Thing emerging from the water.
Yeah, the actress who plays Abby was also pretty damn well cast here. I really like all the performances that I've seen so far within these trailers. And overall, it looks far less generic and less like the sci-fi original Man-Thing than I thought it would be.
Oh yeah, it definitely looks less generic than the first trailer that they put out for the show made it seem. Speaking of Abby, the actress is Crystal Reed. She definitely sold me on her trailer, the second trailer that we're going to talk about, Abby. It opens up with a jump scare. She's lying in bed, her alarm is going off, then all of a sudden this hand just reaches in and snoozes for her, and she just screams.
Oh, that's considerate.
No, I'd be pissed. I'd be like, no, I need that to wake me up. Don't hit the snooze. Looks like the character of Abby is a doctor from the CDC who's come to like investigate some mysterious like goings on within the swamp.
And probably to help Alec with his research.
Yeah, whatever that may be. But she sees some horrific things, like this guy like rooted to a mirror, and then like as she's investigating him, like the mirror cracks. That freaked me out.
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
But I'm a big chicken. Like I hate horror films. In a way, I'm kind of apprehensive to watch this show even.
Because you think it'll be that scary?
This trailer specifically made me afraid, which is a good thing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you said in our Swamp Thing review was that Swamp Thing live action media should be horror based. So this is definitely selling us on that regard.
And is it any wonder, because it's produced by James Wan, who gave us the fantastic Aquaman.
And The Conjuring.
This trailer also gives us our first look at Kevin Durand as the Floronic Man.
Who's that?
He's a DC villain. He's like a plant-based DC villain. He's responsible for giving Poison Ivy her powers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I wonder if they'll introduce Poison Ivy in the show. That would be dope.
Oh, man.
I mean, we know that they're introducing, like, Professor Pig, who's a Batman villain.
Right.
And, like, there's also Blue Devil, who's, like, an obscure DC character. So why not? The more the merrier. I'll just geek out. I think the most horrifying shot in this whole trailer is, like, this monster that Abby sees, like, in the shadows, who has, like, maggots coming out of his, like, mouth and eyes. The special effects are pretty good.
I don't even remember this. I'll have to watch it again. That sounds horrifying. Oh, gross!
Yeah, this is not going to be an easy watch, like by any means. This is going to be rough. But near the end of the trailer, we get what I think is our best look of the Swamp Thing character so far. He's not like crawling out of the muck like in shadows or anything like that. He's like bright green, he has red eyes, and he's just like looking up. It's really cool. It's a really cool shot, and it really sells me on this show.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear your thoughts about the pilot episode in our next podcast.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'll also give my like overall thoughts on season 1 of Doom Patrol in our next episode. So look forward to that as well. But in regards to Swamp Thing's like horror angle that they're taking with it, let's get into our question of the week.
Out of all the Marvel and DC films, shows, and comics, which has been the scariest? Which has scared you the most, and why? Post your answer to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to social media.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your answers. I think that does it for the news this week. Let's jump into our review of X-Men: The Last Stand.
Okay, X-Men: The Last Stand is widely considered the worst film in the franchise, although I do think that title actually belongs to X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But this is probably second worst, followed by probably X-Men Apocalypse. Now, having said that, apparently when I first watched this movie back in 2006, I enjoyed it a lot, which I don't remember, so expand on that.
I remember debating with you and Melissa, your wife, in the car on the ride home, because I was like waiting for someone to like say the first thing, because I wasn't sure how you guys felt about it. I thought you guys probably hated it, because I knew I did. And you guys were like, man, that was awesome. And I was like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? That was horrible.
Well, I think the movie had a few things going for it. We'll talk about what the film had going for it before we rip it to shreds. The first thing that it had going for it was, I think, spectacle and action. I think it delivered on those fronts. I was a big fan of like seeing Beast fly through the air and maul people. I did like the end fight sequence and the scene where Dark Phoenix kind of takes over and starts really fucking shit up the entire Alcatraz base, and like the water around them was like raising up into the air and stuff. I thought it was a powerful moment. And I think the cast did really well, honestly. The cast has always done a serviceable job with these characters for the most part, and I think they were done a huge disservice with the script that they got for this third film, considering that people like Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, and Ian McKellen helped bring credibility not just to these characters, but to modern superhero movies in general.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, the modern era of superhero cinema started with the first X-Men film in the year 2000.
Yeah, exactly. They helped establish this genre that we have now, and it's just too bad that the film sucks so much. I think the main reason why this film is considered one of the worst in the franchise is because of the script. It was a horrible, unnecessary mashup of two of the greatest X-Men runs from the comics. You had the Dark Phoenix saga, which is widely considered, and rightly so, one of the greatest X-Men storylines of all time. And, I mean, you can learn more about that story in our Raven versus Phoenix duel episode, but essentially, what happened was the full potential of Jean's powers were awakened after a crash landing from space, and she was manipulated by elite mutants known as the Hellfire Club to think that her love, Cyclops, had died. And enraged, she flies out into space and destroys a solar system, and the Shi'ar aliens come to execute her, and the X-Men try and defend her on the blue side of the moon, although she ends up killing herself. It was a dark and sad and just wonderful story, though it was later retconned so that Phoenix was not actually a fully realized Jean, but rather a cosmic entity known as the Phoenix Force that was posing as Jean.
I wonder how much of that we'll see in this Dark Phoenix film. Probably none of it.
Now, the angle that this movie took with the Dark Phoenix was that it was a kind of subconscious part of her psyche that developed due to mental blocks that Professor X had placed on her as a child.
And it was resentful.
Right. And so it became like this dark aspect of Jean's personality. And, I didn't mind that angle, and that would have been fine if that was the sole storyline for this film. But the fact that it was bogged down with the Cure storyline from the comics, which was written by Joss Whedon from Astonishing X-Men, and that was about a mutant cure, that was just another phenomenal story too. That could have been its own movie. Neither of these storylines were done justice, therefore both were pretty unsatisfying, which led to an overall unsatisfying film.
If they had to cut one storyline, which one?
The Cure.
The Cure?
Yeah, save that for another movie.
See, I think the opposite. I think the Cure storyline would have made for a much better film to wrap up the series.
But they set up the Dark Phoenix at the end of X-Men 2 when Jean sacrificed herself.
Yeah, they're bad.
Lake.
They're bad.
No, I would have much rather seen the Dark Phoenix story play out in its proper way, and hopefully we'll get to see that when Dark Phoenix comes out in a few weeks here. But yeah, I think the Cure movie could have totally been a fantastic adaptation all on its own because of the ethical questions that it raises. They could have really dived into that, and they totally dropped the ball in that regard. The film showed little to no respect to the fans of the comics and the previous two X-Men films.
And the characters in general.
Yeah, Zach Penn was one of the writers here. He also wrote Elektra. He's the freaking worst superhero screenwriter of all time. He's like the Uwe Boll of screenwriters. And the film was co-written by Simon Kinberg, who wrote the Fantastic movie and is also directing Dark Phoenix. And he's not any better. The fact that these two collaborated on the script is no surprise because it's like the perfect storm of bad dialogue, non-existent character development, and shoddy plot execution, which are traits that you could definitely not use to describe the previous two X-Men films directed by Bryan Singer.
Yeah, this film, of course, was directed by Brett Ratner. So when you have him and Zach Penn and Simon Kinberg, it's like the three musketeers of suckage.
Yeah, and I guess you could consider the studio to be D'Artagnan because they also had a role in this. In fact, most of the behind-the-scenes drama that took place during production of this movie could be blamed on the studio because they were trying to rush to meet their May 2006 release date. They focused more on making the release date than actually making a great film. In a perfect world, the movie would have been delayed and Matthew Vaughn would have stayed on as a director.
Matthew Vaughn was going to direct this film?
Yeah, he was the original replacement for Bryan Singer when Bryan Singer and his team jumped onto the Superman Returns project.
Ugh.
And so it took a while for the studio to find a replacement. They found it in Matthew Vaughn, who made some brilliant choices for this film, including the casting of Ellen Page as Shadowcat and Kelsey Grammer as Beast.
Nice.
But he felt too rushed, felt the movie was going to be crap, rightly so, and so he bailed on the project and was changed at the 25th hour by Brett Ratner.
And now there's all kinds of controversy about Brett Ratner.
Right, yeah, who apparently was a huge douchebag on the set, creating a toxic atmosphere. He outed Ellen Page as gay when she was just 18 before she had come out to anybody.
Right. And he was just being sexist and gross and petty.
Yeah.
And just really not a good person to be around.
Yeah, there's a reason why he doesn't get much work in Hollywood anymore. Behind the scenes drama or not, the fact that this movie was released, it was such a transparent bid for profit more than anything. And in that regard, I feel like this was almost like the Justice League of its time.
Ugh.
Or Justice League was the X-Men 3 of its time. Where you have such behind-the-scenes drama, director replacements, a lack of delays for the film that should have existed.
And Brett Ratner was involved in both films.
Brett Ratner was involved in Justice League?
Justice League was produced under his Rat Pack Dune Entertainment production company.
Okay.
But for the home video release, they changed that to Access Entertainment. So they removed the Rat Pack logo and everything.
Oh, really? Because of the controversy behind him?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, just keep Brett Ratner away from superhero films.
Please.
Matthew Vaughn does such a better job with superhero movies and comic book movies in general, with Kick-Ass and Kingsman, and of course, X-Men First Class, which was the reboot of this franchise that had to take place after this crappy movie. So yeah, the studio knew that they could count on the X-Men brand to sell tickets, and were just frankly lazy when it came to everything regarding the film. But if I had to give the movie credit for anything, it was probably the first ballsy superhero film in that it made bold choices that few other franchises would have done at the time. Like, it killed off 2 major characters and depowered a few others. Although it did leave the tiniest bit of ambiguity as to whether those choices would stick in future installments, but it did kind of pave the way for future films that also had ballsy character deaths like Age of Ultron, Logan, and Infinity War. Although maybe I wouldn't give X-Men 3 that much credit because the deaths in those films were definitely handled better.
I almost wonder if the studio actually did think that this was going to be their last X-Men film.
They did, because traditionally franchises were done in trilogies, and then you would move on from there. But, studios have since learned that you can just keep milking these franchises for profit over and over again, as long as you make the movies good.
Like the MCU.
Right, exactly. But let's go into the character breakdown. Hugh Jackman was probably the saving grace of this film. No matter how bad these films get, and I think this also applies to X-Men Origins Wolverine, though the film may be lacking, he still shows up.
Sort of. By this point, like, his attitude had gotten kind of stale.
What?
Yeah, like, when he was like, who's the furball? And I was like, what a fucking asshole.
That's not his fault, that's the script's fault.
Oh, that's what I'm saying.
None of these actors were able to handle some of these lines. I definitely don't blame him for that. I think he did a great job. At this point, he had been well established in the role, but I think in this particular movie, he got to do more emotionally than he got to do in the previous 2. And that's not to say that the previous 2 films didn't have any like heavy stuff involving the character Wolverine, but in this one, he had to deal with, basically killing the love of his life. And I thought he handled those emotional beats really damn well. As well as the physicality of the role. I mean, he got more jacked in this movie than he had been in the previous 2. And like freaking running through the forest and like just stabbing dudes straight through the chest. It was very true to character.
He's just a really good Wolverine. There's a reason they kept making films with him, like, based on this continuity.
I know,
even
right?
when they rebooted the franchise.
Yeah, exactly. And when I watch movies like X-Men 3 now, I just get so sad that he's not playing the character anymore and that, we're going to have somebody else in the role. Because he was so iconic and he really did define the character for the modern day. It was a little bit disappointing that they kind of took Cyclops' emotional arc from the Dark Phoenix storyline in the comics and gave it to him. Because in the comics, I always kind of saw Wolverine's and Jean's relationship as more flirtatious and more of a crush than any sort of like true love kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at the end of this, he does confess his love for Jean before he stabs her, And obviously, Cyclops has been done a huge disservice throughout this entire franchise.
That made me so mad. Let's talk about Cyclops.
Okay, let's talk about Cyclops. What the fuck? Now, we know that James Marsden had scheduling issues with Superman Returns, which was being directed by Bryan Singer. He brought James Marsden over to that movie, and it was like a thankless role. Like, why was James Marsden even in Superman Returns? He did not need to be in there. He should have been in this film doing what Cyclops was supposed to do in regards to the Dark Phoenix story.
I agree. There was a lot that was unnecessary about the Superman Returns film, and one of them was his character of Perry White's son.
Superman Returns was an unnecessary film to begin with, but you also think about what we lost because of his involvement with that, and it just makes you furious. I love Cyclops so much. They haven't done shit with him.
He had like 2 short scenes in this film. I forgot how little screen time he had in this film. He has like an altercation with Wolverine, and then he like blasts a hole in the lake, and then that's
For
it.
no reason.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh, I'm so angry, I'm just gonna shoot the water with my optic blasts.
Gina, I keep hearing you.
Yeah, it just makes you sad. It would have been great if he would have been able to stick around, had not been in the Superman Returns movie, and, we got something a little bit more faithful.
Luckily, it seems like they're going to do something more with the character in this upcoming Dark Phoenix film.
Thank God. Thank God.
Seriously.
And I do like Ty Sheridan as the character, but watching X-Men 3 again reminded me how much I actually did like James Marsden as Cyclops as well.
He's a good actor. Like, I know he doesn't get like a lot of roles, but he's a really good actor.
Yeah, I've never hated him in anything I've seen him in. But let's move on to Famke Janssen, who played Jean Grey / Phoenix. Now, I thought she gave a fantastic performance in this movie. She was given little to do in the first X-Men movie. She was phenomenal in the second X-Men movie, and I think she carried that over into this one for the first half of the film. Like when she's telling Logan to like kill her and how she's like freaking out, and you can see what's going on in her mind as she realizes what she's done, how she killed Scott, who she's become, what's happening. It's powerful. And she can turn it off and on like a dime, where she goes from really vulnerable to really angry and really scary, actually. Like when she's like threatening Professor X.
Yeah. And
they're fighting psychically, and and she's struggling with the idea that she's even fighting with Professor X. I just love Famke Janssen.
Very attractive.
Oh, yeah. The last half of this movie, she did nothing.
She just stood there.
They gave her this great setup, this great emotional arc, and she did nothing with it as soon as she joined Magneto. She just stayed around as his like backup secret weapon.
Yeah.
Which sucks for Famke, which sucks for the character of Jean Grey, which sucks for fans. I want to live in a parallel universe where Famke Janssen got her due as far as Dark Phoenix goes.
I've always been a fan of her as Jean Grey ever since the first X-Men film. But yeah, from the moment like she threatened Magneto with those cure like syringes to the end of the film, she has like no dialogue almost. She's just like walking around, standing by his side, looking kind of menacing. It's pointless.
Yeah, it's stupid when a character like Dark Phoenix is pushed to the side for another story.
In my opinion, she should have been the main character in this film. Like we should have seen like what she thought about like killing Professor X and stuff like that.
Right. You know? And again, maybe we'll get that with a new movie. What did you think about the kinky love scene between her and Hugh Jackman? Do you think it went too far?
I don't think it went far enough. That was a great scene.
It was. Well,
they
like,
really sold it.
Yeah, I remember like, I wasn't that young when this movie came out. I was like 20 years old. But when she like wraps her legs around him and like telekinetically removes his belt, I was like, oh dang, they're about to go there. Yeah. What movie did I walk into?
Oh, jeez. It's probably one of the steamiest superhero scenes in all of superhero films.
They're two very attractive people, so makes sense. Let's talk about Patrick Stewart, who played Charles Xavier in Professor X. He is the definitive Professor X, as he always has been, and he did a great job in this movie, except for some of the lines that he was given. They kind of gave him a dark streak in this movie. Like, they didn't want him to be too sympathetic. They wanted audiences to understand why he maybe had to die because of how he mentally manipulated Jean Grey. But that entire like turn of character was done over the course of just a few lines of dialogue.
Right.
And therefore it was just freaking horrible. It felt so out of character when Professor X was like, I don't have to explain myself, least of all to you. I'm like, Professor X? What's happening?
Patrick Stewart is just way too likable for me to like not like him.
Well, have you ever seen the movie Green Room?
No.
Yeah, you wouldn't like him in that movie. He does play a good villain, but he is definitely not a villain in this movie. I was pretty emotionally affected when I saw him die in the film.
Oh my gosh.
Especially because it's kind of really graphic the way he dies. Like, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, very graphic.
It's just a few frames, but you basically see him explode.
When I saw that on screen, I was about ready to walk out.
Really?
Like, I got so upset by Cyclops dying because he's like my favorite X-Men character. And then once they did that to Professor X, it was just so fucking disrespectful. I was like, ugh, I'm walking out. Walk out. No.
It was a powerful scene. I think a lot of what made Professor X's death scene so emotional was the music. I was a big fan of the score of this particular film, especially that Dark Phoenix score. It was like dun 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 dun.
Yeah, I'll agree with you if that emotion was disgust. I did not get emotional by that at all. Like, I didn't shed a tear. I was fucking angry.
You were just angry? You weren't sad?
No,
okay.
Just angry.
That's interesting. But yeah, Patrick Stewart, despite the fact he was given a shit deal in this film, I still think he did a really great job with it. A person who has never done a great job in these films is Halle Berry as Aurora Monroe and Storm. Every single bit of dialogue that she has coming out of her mouth, I never believe. She's just not a good actress, and she never has been.
It's true.
She's attractive, and she looks like a believable superheroine, but she is not the Aurora Monroe that I know of from the comics. And I know she's won an Oscar and everything, but I never saw Monsters Ball, and I have no idea how she pulled that off.
She got naked. I think that probably helped.
Jesus Christ. She got naked in Swordfish, too. She didn't win an Oscar for that.
That's true.
But, like, I just remember, like, the scenes where she's fighting Callisto and she's, like, pretending to get hit by her. It's some of the worst, like, action acting I've ever seen. Especially since in the comics, Callisto doesn't have Quicksilver powers.
Exactly.
You know, she doesn't have super speed. And that's one of the most frustrating things about this movie is their melding of characters because they were just so fucking lazy. They thought this was going to be the last installment. They wanted to get as many superpowers and as many, like, homages to mutant characters from the comics within this film that they just decided to group a bunch of them together. So you have Psylocke here with like camouflage powers.
Yeah.
You have Callisto with super speed. You have Kid Omega with Quill's powers. It's so dumb.
I have no idea who Kid Omega is, but I'm still angry.
It's just a slap in the face. And you know, at least thankfully we got a decent Psylocke in X-Men Apocalypse.
Still waiting to see her return.
But yeah, going back to Halle Berry, one of the best things about this Marvel acquisition, I think, in my opinion, is that we never have to see her as Storm ever again.
Damn.
But on a lighter note, I did really enjoy Kelsey Grammer as Hank McCoy in Beast. When he was first cast by Matthew Vaughn, I was ecstatic because he had the perfect voice. I wasn't sure what the makeup job was going to look like, and thankfully that came out like flawless.
Perfect.
But I knew that his voice was just going to kill it for the character. He is, to me, Beast. And, he was older when he was cast in this role. He was like in his late 40s, early 50s, I think.
That's fine.
But it was perfectly fine because that aging was hid from the makeup. And also, he was supposed to be an older character within this movie, established as like one of the first X-Men characters.
Exactly, because in the comics, he was one of the first 5.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they held true to that continuity when they rebooted for X-Men First Class.
Touching on that off topic real quick, I think one of the biggest travesties of this film is the fact that you had the original 5 X-Men characters all in the film.
Oh, Iceman, Angel, Beast, Cyclops, Phoenix. Yeah.
And you didn't like recreate the iconic scene from the cover of X-Men #1.
That would have been so cool. Yeah, that would have been amazing.
I thought that's what we were going to get. Like, I was looking forward to that going into this film when I first saw it. Didn't happen.
Yeah, they didn't know how to do proper fan service at this point in time.
No.
In comic book movie history. But Beast's scenes as a diplomat, as the head of mutant affairs with the U.S. government, were some of my favorite scenes because I think those were the only ones that were like well written. I think his dialogue with the president was extremely believable.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that had to do with delivery or if Kelsey Grammer just rewrote all of his lines or something. But I really enjoyed it, especially when the president's like, I wonder how democracy survives when a man can move cities with his mind. And Beast was like, as do I. They actually touched on like real issues that would exist if mutants were real. And really, I just want to see like a whole movie or television series with Beast working in the West Wing. I would watch the shit out of that. That just sounds so interesting.
It's like the West X-Wing.
The West X-Wing. But yeah, just him like solving like the day-to-day affairs of like mutant and human relations. And at the end of this film, he became an ambassador. So that could be like season 2, when he becomes an ambassador and goes around the world dealing with mutant affairs.
Exactly.
That'd be so cool. And the theme will sound like a mixture between the 90s X-Men cartoon and the Frasier theme and the West Wing theme. Sold. Tossed salad and scrambled eggs. Dun, dun. In regards to the other X-Men characters, let's just go quick down the line of all the X-Men kids, as I call them. Anna Paquin as Rogue had very little to do here. Did not appreciate her arc of basically
just wanting
changing
to get laid.
herself to get laid, basically. Changing herself for a boy, which is, the wrong reason to do it, I think.
Right.
Sean Ashmore played Bobby Drake / Iceman. It was really cool that he got to go into full ice mode here. I squealed like a little girl. It was one of the best parts of this movie, I think, the whole Iceman versus Pyro scene, because that's something that we wanted to see since the last movie.
Right.
And the special effects I thought were pretty well done. I like how he kicked the shit out of Pyro.
What do you think of Bobby as a 2-timing fool?
He did not 2-time Rogue. I think it was clearly established that Kitty Pryde was his friend and Rogue was his interest. I don't think any of the affectionate overtures between Shadowcat and Iceman were overt, and the fact that he kept coming back to Rogue, I think, was a testament to his loyalty to his girlfriend. But let's talk about Shadowcat, who I think was played down to a T by Ellen Page, who is a phenomenal actress. I'm a huge fan of Ellen Page, though, ever since Hard Candy. She's just fantastic. And I think she looked the part of Shadowcat so much. And the way they portrayed her use of powers in this film was so damn cool. Like the way she was phasing through the ground and the way she phased Juggernaut into the ground.
Yeah.
And phased through that guy and then slammed him down by his shoulders.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
She's definitely the best of the 3 Kitty Prydes that they had across this trilogy.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And you kind of have to wonder why she was even given a substantial role in this film. Was it just to create a love triangle between Iceman and Rogue?
I think that, and maybe also for the action set piece that was Shadowcat versus Juggernaut. Because, she can run through walls, he can crash through walls. That's a great spectacle. Matthew Vaughn not only cast Ellen Page, but he also cast Vinnie Jones in the role of Juggernaut. Because he thought it would be funny to have, this British gangster guy be the stepbrother of Patrick Stewart.
And they didn't even touch on that.
No, they didn't. So dumb. Daniel Cudmore as Pyotr Rasputin / Colossus. He was in this film. I'm really glad that they did the character of Colossus more justice in the Deadpool films, because he was criminally underutilized in these first 3 X-Men movies.
I think the main reason he was in this film was just for the fastball special, though.
Right.
He should have gone toe-to-toe with Juggernaut.
That would have been great. That's what I wanted to see, and I'm so glad they did that in Deadpool 2.
Yeah.
And the last X-Men to talk about is Warren Worthington III, a.k.a. Angel, who was played by Ben Foster. Never thought Ben Foster would make a great Warren Worthington.
He's a really good actor, though.
He has such good range, and he got ripped for this role. He looked great as Archangel.
I thought the wings looked great, even though they were like dove wings.
The wings looked phenomenal. Well, that's how they are in the comics too, you know? They're like these huge angelic wings, and I never really quite understood how magnificent they would look like in real life until we saw it in live action.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in the comics, he's like, oh, he just has bird wings, you know? But in this, it's like, oh, you know what? That would actually be a really damn cool mutant power to be able to fly like that.
Yeah.
That being said, I think his character was also underutilized here too. I would have really enjoyed to see him join the X-Men team in that final fight, although maybe he wasn't as trained as the other X-Men characters.
Right.
He did save his father and everything like that, but that was just kind of a throwaway. I wanted to see him in the X-Men suit. You know, I wanted to see him a full-fledged member.
And fight.
Yeah. It's always interested me how Warren fights in battles.
And of course, we got to see that in Apocalypse.
Yeah, and that was pretty cool, although his wings in Apocalypse didn't look nearly as cool as they did here.
Yeah, surprisingly.
Yeah, that's weird. Still jamming through this character breakdown, let's move on to the bad guys. Ian McKellen / Eric Lyncher / Magneto did as great a job as always here, but just like Patrick Stewart, just was not given the best of scripts.
He's always like the more interesting character in these X-Men films, in my opinion.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if it's just because of the performances, they just get really good actors to portray Magneto.
Uh-huh.
But he's one of the characters in this film that I think they did mostly right.
Despite having some of the weakest lines. I mean, he does his best with them, you know. I do love the way he plays off of Patrick Stewart's Professor X, like in the opening scene where they're visiting Jean, and when they go back to the home later on, and he's like antagonizing Professor X to Phoenix, you know? And despite the fact that he does dumbass shit like raise the Golden Gate Bridge to transport his group over there when he could have transported them on literally anything and not leave a back entrance for the U.S. military to come and attack him from behind and everything like that, you know?
Right.
So stupid. He's still one of my favorite characters from this franchise.
Yeah, mine too.
Rebecca Romijn was also in this movie playing Raven Darkholme Mystique. She had an itty-bitty role in this, but it just served as a reminder of how much of a better Mystique she is than Jennifer Lawrence.
Oh my gosh. I thought the character was fantastic in this film for the amount of screen time she had.
I like it when Mystique is more mysterious. You know, she barely talks in these, and she has like a weird voice when she does. She kicks just all the ass, super lethal. I like Mystique when she's a villain, you know, and not, you know, morally flip-floppy like she is in the First Class reboot.
Oh, right. Just the scene where like she's transforming into like the president and then like the little girl. It was just so sinister.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And it was so sad. Sad when she lost her powers and then Magneto just abandoned her.
Yeah, that was hard, but he was a dick. Despite the small role, some of the thematic implications that arose when Magneto abandoned her were massive, you know? There are so many ethical questions that arise from this movie that they just never touch on, and they could have. A better movie would have done that.
Like what?
Like the nature of a cure, of curing a genetic defect, as opposed to accepting it. The nature of being a mutant. Does your defect define you? According to Magneto, it does.
And whether it's a quote-unquote defect at all.
Right, exactly. I think these are themes that at the time the gay community, or really any sort of minority community, was able to tap into at the time. And I think we were owed more of an exploration of these themes, considering that that's what the comics have done.
I think it's always been pretty overt in these films that there's a correlation between the mutant gene and, you know, things like homosexuality, you know, like the coming out scene to Bobby's parents in X-Men 2 and
right,
stuff like that.
Right, which has always been fascinating and a huge part of the appeal of these characters.
From the comics to the film.
Right, yeah, and that's why we as fans don't want to see just like a spectacle action movie. We want to see a whole lot more, because you can do a whole lot more with the X-Men.
You could ask really big questions.
Yes, exactly. Vinnie Jones played Kane Marco / the Juggernaut. We already talked about him a little bit briefly. There's not too much more to say other than his costume really sucked.
Ugh.
I'm really glad that they did him more justice in the Deadpool 2 movie.
I do have to say, though, I didn't realize until this film why it was so fitting that Kitty Pryde called him a dickhead. Because that helmet was fucking ridiculous.
What did you think of the "I'm the Juggernaut bitch" line?
I mean, I laughed in the theaters when it happened, but...
Because I knew that it had come from like this redubbing of the X-Men cartoon that these guys had done on YouTube. This was way back before the movie even came out. And actually, it was Brett Ratner's inspiration for including the "I'm the Juggernaut bitch" line in this movie, because he saw that same YouTube video.
Classy Brett Ratner.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think a lot of people saw that YouTube video, so they didn't understand the shout out.
Right.
But even when I see him say "I'm the Juggernaut bitch" now, I still laugh. Aaron Stanford played John Allardyce / Pyro. He did a phenomenal job here. I've always really liked Aaron Stanford in this role. He's a phenomenal actor who's kind of like slumming it, I think, in these films a little bit, because he is really talented.
It was nice to see him carry over from the previous film.
Yes, yeah, because we wanted to see that Iceman Pyro fight. It's like almost like they made this film with just action set pieces in mind, and that's how they got their whole cast of characters. Like, that's why they had Shadowcat. That's why they included Pyro again, because they wanted that Pyro versus Iceman fight.
I could totally see that.
Yeah, they kind of reverse engineered the story from the action scenes they wanted.
And I wouldn't be surprised if that's how a lot of writers like Zach Penn write. Because you're supposed to have an action beat every 10 minutes. So you start with the action scenes you want to see, then you build the story around that.
Which is stupid.
Yeah. You're not going to tell a substantial, meaningful story that way.
Right. I do like the little devices that Pyro had on his wrist. I did miss the metal lighter that he had in X-Men 2.
We had devices like that in the comics, right? Except they
Yeah.
were like tubes that come.
Yeah, and they weren't
something.
like flints. They were like connected to gas tanks on his back.
Okay.
The flint sparks are much more practical.
Yeah, he's not going to blow himself up.
Right, exactly. And last but not least, I just want to mention Multiple Man because I'm a huge Multiple Man fan. The worst thing about Disney's acquisition of the Fox franchise is that it's likely that the James Franco Multiple Man movie is not going to happen. We haven't really heard much about that movie since the almost a year that it's been announced.
Yeah. Who knows? He could still pitch the idea to Disney.
That's true. I would love to see a Multiple Man film. But yeah, I think that does it for all the characters. Let's go ahead and get into the story breakdown. So the film starts off 20 years ago, which you should realize is the same time frame as X-Men Apocalypse. So you look at Patrick Stewart in this opening shot, and then you look at James McAvoy in X-Men Apocalypse, and you just have to wonder, what the heck happened age-wise?
Ugh. That CGI.
It was so horrible.
It's so bad. You made the comparison earlier to Justice League. This cold open reminded me so much of like the Henry Cavill mouth debacle.
Yes. Or
So weird looking.
It looks like their faces were floating on their heads.
Yes. Yeah. Ugh.
I didn't really like this scene too much, mainly because it seemed like Jean Grey was a little brat. I've always just thought of Jean Grey as, a heroic character, so it's weird to see her being an arrogant little shit when she's a kid.
Right.
We got the Stan Lee cameo here where, his garden hose, the water that's coming out of it is flying up into the sky. That was pretty cool.
Was it?
Not really. Fast forward to 10 years ago, and we see a young Warren Worthington first developing his wings, and he's trying to, file them down while in the bathroom.
That was a powerful scene.
It was such a powerful scene. He's trying to deal with this emerging mutation in the bathroom, and he's crying, and he's freaking out, as we all do as we get older and we see our bodies changing, but to a much more extreme way.
Yeah.
His dad comes knocking on the door. Here's these tools. I don't know if he thinks if he's cutting himself or something like that, which essentially he kind of is.
Yeah.
The kid actor that is in this scene is just so phenomenal.
He sold it. He sold it so well.
Yeah, I feel for him, when he's crying and apologizing.
For something he can't even control.
Exactly.
Oh, it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. And at that point, I was prepared for a much more thematically resonant, emotional movie, and it didn't really happen.
No.
From there, we go into the danger room, which I hated this scene so much. I hated every single thing about the danger room scene. I was looking forward to a danger room sequence for so long in these films, and what we got was such crap. I mean, they're going up against a Sentinel in a post-apocalyptic simulation, and the dialogue is just atrocious.
It's really
especially
bad.
Storm's delivery of all of her lines were just so bad. Wolverine, stop!
They're not ready yet, Storm.
Don't do this! I mean, the fastball special was cool and everything like that. And seeing the Sentinel's head land was cool. But then all of a sudden Wolverine just walked out from behind.
Right. He was like, was he in the head?
What the hell is
Did
going
he teleport?
on? It was a really bad omen of the things that were to come later on this film when it comes to dialogue and editing and special effects and everything like that.
Ugh.
And, Halle Berry's performance. The way she was pleading with Wolverine, he was about to do something drastic that was going to get them all killed or something like that.
I know. And then
It was overacting.
And the way he was so aloof, I was like, what is going on?
So the Danger Room session ends, and we learn that Wolverine was subbing for Scott, who is hearing voices of Jean Grey in his head, and he's going through a lot of emotional turmoil, so he goes to set out to investigate.
And I love the line that Cyclops gave Logan where he was like, we don't all heal as fast as you do, Logan.
As much as I give the dialogue shit in this movie, there are some decent lines here, and that is definitely one of the better ones. Warren Worthington, for the past 10 years, has apparently been working on a mutant cure, which he announces, which leaves the X-Men team divided as to what they should do. You have Beast and Professor X, who are fairly neutral on the matter. I think they could understand both sides of why you would want to get the cure and why you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Then you have Storm, who's totally anti-cure, and then you have Rogue, who's pro-cure, which is actually how I think it would play out in the comics as well. I think they were pretty true to character on their stances. Although, if I remember correctly from Astonishing X-Men, Beast was pro-cure. I think he wanted to test tested on himself.
Yeah. Because his blue fur is an accident.
Right, exactly. It's a result of him experimenting on himself. The cure causes mass panic among the mutant population across the world, and Magneto shows up at a community meeting to rally mutants to his cause of destroying the cure because he views it as offensive as well.
He thinks that they're going to weaponize it and force it upon them.
Yeah, which the government kind of does. They do weaponize it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Scott goes over to Alkali Lake, just shoots the water just cuz, and Phoenix comes out and kills him.
Dumb!
But we don't know why. Why does she kill him?
If I knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't be so pissed off. It's done with such little fanfare off screen. The whole time I'm wondering, is he really dead?
That was annoying.
Yeah, she like deactivates his like powers, and then we don't see him again, and he's not even mentioned as to whether or not he's dead for like the next half hour, it feels like.
Yeah. They don't give a shit about Cyclops.
Fuck!
There was a nice moment, though, when she deactivated his powers, his optic blast, because that was from the comics, so I appreciated that.
You gotta see his real eyes.
Yeah, I mean, they should have gone farther with it, you know?
I think that's gonna happen in the Dark Phoenix film. I think we've seen like little snippets from the trailers where she does that for him.
Hopefully. Wolverine and Storm go investigate Alkali Lake, where they find Phoenix, and they bring her back to the mansion, and we learn that Professor X is a dickhead, and he and Wolverine get into an argument, which we've already stated is pretty out of character, I think, for Professor X.
Yeah.
Or at least this version of him as he's been portrayed in these movies. Magneto uses one of the mutants that he recruited, Callisto, to track down the location of Mystique, and he attacks the prison convoy that she's being held in, which was a pretty cool scene until I remembered, like, why would the drivers continue to head toward Magneto if they see that all the cars in front of them have already been demolished?
Right.
It was pretty cool how he took him out, though. How he was just like crushing the cars and like flipping them up through the air and everything like that. I did like that. I always liked the way they portrayed the more extreme uses of his powers within these films.
Yeah. I hated when they freed like Multiple Man from his container and just how fake that looked. And then he's like, yeah, sure, I'll join him in.
Yeah, no character development whatsoever.
So dumb.
And same thing with Juggernaut, where he's like, let me out, I gotta pee. And then, he just joins their cause.
Yeah. And he says the helmet keeps his face pretty, and it's like, that's not why you wear a helmet.
Right, it's for psychic protection.
From his stepbrother.
Exactly. The Brotherhood abandons Mystique when she gets depowered, which was messed up. But then we go back to Jean and Logan, who have a sexy, kinky, almost love scene. But he confronts her and asks, what happened to Scott, and she freaks out and escapes the mansion. She goes back to her childhood home. So the X-Men go to her childhood home to pick her up, where the Brotherhood is already waiting because they were able to find her through Callisto as well, who's able to track her. There's a big fight in the house. Professor X dies. Super tragic. Did not see that coming. I really thought Wolverine sucked at fighting against the Juggernaut. For some reason, he just wasn't able to even scratch him. Right. I don't understand how that's possible.
Right.
But Storm was able to handle the rest of the Morlocks herself. They have a funeral for Professor X, which I thought was actually pretty well done, honestly. It was probably Halle Berry's best line delivery when she's giving his eulogy.
Yeah.
And just seeing everybody's reactions, it was pretty touching, I think.
I was still angry at the time when I first saw this. Especially because they didn't have a funeral for Scott at the time either.
Yeah, exactly. What's up with that? Well, they had a tombstone for him.
At the very end.
Yeah. Because I think they finally realized what happened. But Wolverine starts getting calls for help from Jean Grey, who's in the woods now with the rest of the Brotherhood. And so he goes to investigate. It's a pretty sweet-ass action scene with him against Spike, who is one of my least favorite X-Men characters. He's from X-Men Evolutions, the television show.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason, they decided to include him in this movie.
And he's based off of the character Marrow.
Yeah, kind of. I've never really liked Marrow either. Although the concept of, like, throwing your bones at people is pretty neat, if a little bit gross.
Here's my skull!
No, they never do that. But Marrow would, like, grow bone protrusions out of her body that she could just, like, pull out.
Yeah,
and use as, like,
swords
weapons.
And stuff, yeah.
Yeah. And Spike, for some reason, just was able to, like, shoot them out like guns. Although in the movie here, he, like, pulls them out of his forearm and then throws them.
And they're all, like, twisted and viney. It's weird.
Yeah, it's so... gross. So while spying there, Wolverine learns that they plan on attacking the Alcatraz facility where they're developing the cure. So he rallies the rest of the X-Men to go over to San Francisco, where Magneto has raised the Golden Gate Bridge and used it to transport the Brotherhood to the facility. This is where the last stand begins, where the mutants start attacking the military, and the military is able to start depowering some of them because they have their plastic cure weapons. But then Arclight, who is like a mixture between Arclight and Stacey X from the comics.
She looks like Stacey X.
Yeah, Stacey X is also going to be in the new Dark Phoenix storyline. So that's so weird. Like, Simon Kinberg just must really like that character. No idea what's happening there. But she's able to target, I guess, the vibratory frequency of the plastic weapons and destroy them all. And at that point, the X-Men come in and hold the line to protect Leech, the source of the cure.
Which Leech was a surprise in this film.
Yeah, I actually thought it was semi-clever, the fact that they made him the source of the cure, because that wasn't part of the comics. In the comics, Dr. Rao developed the cure, but it's always been Leech's ability in the comics to negate mutant powers or any type of powers, mutant or otherwise. So the fact that they thought to combine those two things was actually not a bad idea.
The scene where Beast like approaches Leech for the first time and his hand just like turns human. I remember that scene from the trailer for this film.
Yes.
And it was just a cool scene.
Yes.
Because you know what that means to Beast.
Right.
As a character.
Exactly. He was very conflicted.
Yeah.
The X-Men seem to be holding the line well until Magneto and Pyro start combining, their ability to start hurling cars that are on fire, that start crashing everywhere. So the X-Men decide that they have to, use the cure weapon against Magneto, which is a little bit hypocritical, I thought, especially the fact that Beast was the one that delivered that blow.
And he was the one who was worried that it was going to be used against mutants forcefully.
Right, he resigned as the head of the Department of Mutant Affairs because of the fact that the cure was weaponized. And here he was using it.
And ultimately, maybe that's just a good story arc. He learned that, hey, there are situations where that needs to happen.
I mean, I guess he is a realist. I'll say that. But I did like Ian McKellen's performance when he realizes that he was, no longer a mutant and one of them.
Yeah.
It seems like that's the end for the Brotherhood, even though Phoenix has done jack shit up until this point.
Just standing there looking at everything.
Military reinforcements come from the other side of the bridge and start trying to shoot everybody with the cure. And that's when Dark Phoenix, decides to fucking do something. And what she does is she just fucking kills everybody.
It's crazy.
I mean, I do like the special effects of seeing someone turn to dust.
It's just like breaks everyone's atoms apart.
Right, yeah, that was actually pretty cool. I did like this scene, actually, when she became Dark Phoenix. Although, we didn't get any of the cool fire effects. She just happened to be standing next to some fire.
Yeah, and she was backlit by, the fire, and it, caused, this halo around her hair to, glow.
Like a fiery aura kind of thing.
It was all right. I do think that the effects they're using from what we've seen in Dark Phoenix look much better.
Yes.
Because I want my Phoenix to be fiery.
And real fiery, psychic energy, as opposed to, just standing next to a fire.
Right.
The shot where the camera pans around the whole scene, where we see the water flying up into the air, the music swelling, it's from Wolverine's point of view. He sees Phoenix off in the distance, and he knows what he has to do. He has to go up there and kill her. He's walking toward her, and she's basically just trying to rip him apart too. But apparently, in these movies, his healing factor is so fucking powerful that he can regenerate as quick as she's tearing him apart. It's kind of ridiculous, but I also thought it was kind of clever because no one else would have been able to survive approaching her.
It's like his healing factor was pushing against her telekinetic force.
Yeah.
I didn't mind it.
I actually did not mind it, no. I wonder how Cyclops is going to avoid being atomized in Dark Phoenix movie.
By saying the right words.
Okay. So the aftermath, after Jean dies, we see that the school has been reopened with Storm as the new headmistress, which I think was a great call out to her leadership roles that she's had of the X-Men in the comics. We see that Beast has been appointed to be the ambassador to the United Nations for the U.S., which was really cool. Wolverine is staying on at the school as a teacher to help raise the next generation of mutants.
And Leech is going to the school now, and I think everyone's going to hate him.
Yeah, everyone's going to fucking hate Leech. He's going to be a pariah for sure, except for maybe Rogue.
I can't do my powers around you, dude. Get away from me.
Rogue's going to be like, hey, can you just kind of hang around while I make out with my boyfriend?
Well, she's already cured.
But as we learn by the very last scene of this movie, the cure is temporary, which really fucking negates this entire movie.
The whole movie.
Exactly.
That really pissed me off.
That really pissed me off too, because Beast even said at the beginning, they found a way to suppress the mutant gene permanently. They're calling it a cure. He said the word permanently.
Right.
And it's not permanent.
They lied to us.
Exactly. Which kind of made me groan at the very last shot of the movie, where Magneto moves the chess piece with his mind. It's subtle, it's barely perceptible, but we all saw it move.
I'm pretty sure you loved that at the very end when you first saw this.
Okay, I love the fact that this meant that we might get more X-Men movies, but I hated it from a story perspective.
Yeah, from a story standpoint, you're right. It just negates the whole film.
Right. You have to remember, this is before the MCU was brought about. And I just wanted more superhero movies. So if I saw a way for them to continue the franchise, I was going to be excited by that, but I was not excited by that story element itself. This film should be noted for the fact that it was probably, I think, the first Marvel movie to include a post-credit sequence that furthered the plot of the film's story.
Yeah, except that this one wasn't any good. It sucked.
Basically, we learned that the comatose body that Professor X was referring to as he was giving a lesson earlier on in the film was his own twin brother. Now, in the comic books, Professor X does have a twin. It's a twin sister. Her name is Cassandra Nova, and she's freaking evil. Professor X tried to kill her in the womb.
Because he foresaw how evil she was going to be.
Right, exactly. It would have been interesting if in this after credit scene it wasn't a twin brother but a twin sister and Professor X woke up as a woman. I think that would have been hilarious. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this end credit scene because while I do think that it was a clever way for Professor X to get around death, I also feel like it was also pretty cheap.
It was too convenient. He just happened to have a twin brother who was comatose, and he happens to be psychic. It's bullshit.
I do like how they made Dr. Moira McTaggart Scottish in this movie, though, because she wasn't in X-Men First Class.
Yeah, the actress made a good Moira, I thought.
Yeah. And I thought for like the sequel after X-Men 3, I thought they were going to make an X-Men 4 that involved Proteus, who is a reality-altering mutant that is the son of Dr. Moira McTaggart. I thought that would have been cool. But instead, they rebooted, and I think the franchise was made better for it because I did really like X-Men First Class, and I think Days of Future Past was able to utilize both casts pretty well.
Yeah.
Although you see X-Men Apocalypse, and you have to wonder if it was even worth it by this point.
They mention in X-Men Apocalypse how the third film is usually shit.
Yeah.
And I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, that does it for this review. Overall, I have to give this movie 2.5 stars. So it's like halfway between 0 and 5. Because while it did have good action set pieces and, the actors are still likable, the story was just crap. And I think when you balance all things overall, I think the film mostly ends up disappointing. Mainly because of its choice to dilute two of the X-Men's greatest storylines into one film.
And just because of, the whole drama behind the scenes that was going on and everything.
Right.
Just troubled production that never fares well for, finished product.
Yeah, what star rating do you give it?
I'm going to be a little bit more harsh with it because I think when you compare it to what's coming out now, it's just gotten worse as a film, I think.
That's probably true. Although I think when you compare it to X-Men Origins Wolverine, which we gave 1.5 stars.
Yeah.
I think it's more than just a half-star step up from X-Men Origins Wolverine.
That's fair. Actually, that's really fair. Yeah, I'll probably agree with you. I'll give it 2.5 stars.
Okay. Cool. Well, listeners, let us know what you guys thought about X-Men 3, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it. Go ahead and reach out to us via email at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by going to our website, dynamicduel.com, and finding links to our social media profiles there.
Yeah, and if you go to our newly redesigned website, you'll find a link to our merchandise store, which is on TeePublic, and we put up new designs every week. So if you haven't been there in a while, definitely check back again. There should be something that strikes your fancy.
Yeah, help support the podcast. You could do that by visiting our merch store or by sharing this podcast with your friends and family who are into Marvel and DC, or just Marvel.
Or just DC.
In our next episode, we will be doing a duel match, X-Men related and build up to the Dark Phoenix film, in which we pit Cyclops versus Negative Man from the Doom Patrol.
And this is either going to be like a really great matchup or like the worst matchup we've ever done.
We'll see how it plays out. Basically, there are two characters who have to protect the outside world from their powers, and they're energy-based, and we'll see how it goes. It'll be fun. But yeah, that does it for this episode, and we will talk to you guys next week. And until then,
up and away.
true believers.